Huh. Okay. Well, last year I had to follow Bjorn also. This year was even worse. How do I live up to that? Follow that up. The whole team behind him. Oh well. To make it worse, this year's slides are just last year's slides about the tool SDK, but I just did the same thing for workflows. All right. So before coming to the conference, I thought that maybe my slides or some of the things I was going to say on stage would be a little bit controversial. So I wanted to say outright that everything I say up here is my own opinion. But I did want to sort of articulate what I think is like a broad opinion among a lot of Galaxy tool developers and Galaxy committers about workflows before I got into my own opinions about workflows. And the two things that I kind of wanted to say were that the most important user in Galaxy, I think, ultimately is the bench scientist. This is about accessibility. We're not trying to make a better snake-make, a better-baked file when we think about Galaxy workflows. That's not what we're setting out to do, even if maybe it looks like that today. And then Galaxy workflows will never require an SDK. I think that I'll talk about Planemo and workflow features, formats, and these are conveniences for people who like developer processes, but ultimately I think the Galaxy workflow editor and the ability to extract a workflow from history are incredibly powerful and incredibly democratic and at the core of the Galaxy project. And so that I think articulates a broad philosophy, and now we'll just sort of get into my own opinion on things. Just to hit this UI point a little bit before I get into Planemo and stuff, I think over the last year there's been a lot of great UI improvements to workflows. So Sam, last year I talked about his new tool form. This year that tool form has become pervasive in the workflow editor. So in the workflow editor, you see it on the side. When you go to run a workflow form, soon it will be powered by the new workflow, by the new tool form. And so this will allow us to have a lot more dynamicity, I guess, when running workflows. And it is a consistent UI throughout the interface, and that will be that will greatly simplify the process of maintaining tool forms in Galaxy. I'm going to talk a lot about workflows as programs today. I think workflows are programs, and I have a slide about that coming up. But when you write a program, it's important to have labels for things. It's important to have clear and unique identifiers. And so all inputs and outputs of workflows can now be labeled, and this is available in the UI. Part of workflows being programs means that it's useful and necessary, I think, to have composition of programs. So workflows now allow nesting of workflows. This was a very frequently requested feature. I didn't know that anyone was using it, but then I was talking to Brad at the reception. He was like, no, thank you so much. We use sub workflows all the time. So he was nice enough to send me a slide. He works at New England Biolabs up here, a lightning talk yesterday. It's fantastic. And he's using sub workflows. Yep. So why did I bring up Planemo? I think that Planemo has been a success over the last year, and I think that this last talk demonstrated that. I think it's become the way to develop tools in Galaxy. And I think some of the reasons why is that it's artifact-centric. So when I say I want to test a tool, I don't have to start, my first step isn't load up Galaxy, edit an XML file with a tool list, run some Galaxy script. I say, Planemo, test my tool. And it's not registry-centric either. So the toolshed workflow, that sort of, the toolshed workflow development process for a while for tools was to test a tool, I load it into a toolshed, I load the dependencies into the toolshed, I run the toolshed bootstrap process. I think that the Planemo's success is that it's artifact-centric. And I want to do the same thing with workflows. I think another key secret to the success is that it builds on existing developer processes. So it's a CLI tool. It allows you to publish tools to GitHub. It doesn't get in the way. It's built into Travis. All the testing that Bjorn talked about is driven by Planemo. It's very flexible, very easy, and it's well documented, and the documentation focuses on usage examples. I think that makes it usable. So the tool development process in Planemo, I think, has been successful because it's focused on developer experience. And I hope to do the same thing with workflows. So I have this existing idea that works kind of well, and I want to try it on something completely different. And we'll see if it makes sense. I don't know. As I said, workflows are programs. When I write programs, as a developer, I write tests, and I write them first. I commit to GitHub all the time. That's my resume. And I use a text editor, my text editor. It's an artisanal text editor that's just mine, and that's important to me. So I think that Planemo is going to allow those kind of developer I'm using workflows two different ways here. This is not good. Planemo is going to allow these kind of developer processes for workflows. So starting, today, you can say Planemo serve and give it a workflow file, and it'll bring up a Galaxy interface. It will install all the shed tools you need, and you can play with your workflow, just like you can with a tool. If you have local tools that aren't in the tool shed that you want to reference, you can give Planemo this extra tools argument, and it will load them as well. But workflows are harder to serve than tools. And here's like 4 problems I've identified with sort of serving and testing workflows with Planemo. It takes longer to set up the input data. It takes a lot of time to set up and install the toolshed tools. So part of what makes Planemo fun is the sort of interactive, like instant feedback. The SQLite database locks when you use workflows with Galaxy in the default setting. And then cluster access is more important when you're testing workflows than it is when you're testing an individual tool. So I think I've addressed these 4 issues. Planemo now supports a concept of a profile. It's a persistent named Galaxy configuration that's available for serving, running, and testing across workflow invocations or tool invocations. And you can create one by just saying Planemo profile create and giving it a name. And then when I run a Planemo command, such as serve, I can give it the profile name, and the workflow will be loaded up in that context. So I only need to install the relevant toolshed tools once. Profiles also work with Postgres. So when you create your profile, if you give it the Postgres flag, Planemo will attempt to automatically provision a Postgres database just for this profile. And then all future serve, run, and test commands will use that database. Likewise, the profile can be configured to target a cluster. So when you call profile create, you can give it a job comp XML, or you can set up a default job comp XML in your Planemo configuration file. So I think that addresses those issues or those limitations with the default Galaxy. This is a way to get a production Galaxy with Planemo, but still maintain that sort of artifact-centric process. One problem is you would still need Postgres on your database, or you'd still need Postgres on your system, and you'd still need a Slurm cluster to talk to. One thing that's really nice about Bjorn's Docker Galaxy stable project is it has Slurm built in, it has Postgres built in, so it should be the case that Planemo should just be able to use that Galaxy instance for dealing with the artifacts, and it can now. So when you create a profile, you can specify an engine type, so by default it will just clone Galaxy and use it, but instead you can use the Docker Galaxy engine type, and it will use the Docker Galaxy stable project, which has all those same goodies, plus some more, such as support for ProFTP and supervisor and UWSGI, which are, perhaps not super relevant for, workflow development. But so now we can serve these workflows, but I still want to edit them and sort of build them up as I go. The Galaxy workflow format, it doesn't really have a workflow format, so if you ever look at the JSON files, it is neither human writable nor even really readable. There's JSON serialized inside of JSON serialized into JSON. So it's not ideal or really even feasible. So I'm going to introduce today an improvement on that called Format 2 workflow. I'm calling Format 2 workflows. And here's an example. As you can see, you give it a name. You can specify toolshed repositories to install. So here I'm going to install some text processing repositories. The text processing repository from Bjorn. I explicitly label my inputs. By default, they're assumed to be files, and then the outputs and where I'm getting them. Each step has a label. So in here it's called an ID. I'm running the sed command, and then I'm running a sort command on the inputs. And then the state is just a simple YAML description. And there's a little DSL for linking steps together. To sort of power this, there's two projects that sort of power the back end. One is the GX Format 2 project. It's available on GitHub and PyPy, and it just takes that Format 2 workflow and converts it to Galaxy workflow, so you can load it into Galaxy. And then the Ephemeris project, which is what powers the toolshed synchronization that this does. And to do this project was, I think, originally done by Marius and Ennis and Bjorn and others in the Ansible Galaxy Tools project, and there were really great scripts in there for doing these things, but Ephemeris is taking those tools out of the Ansible role and putting them in PyPy so they can be used without Ansible. Just a couple other examples of some things that are possible with workflow, with Format 2 workflows. They can use workflow composition using sub-workflows. So there's this a run step instead of a traditional tool step. You can have implicit connections between tools. So at last year's GCC, Dan presented a workflow for using data managers. But he was, dealing with that big JSON blob directly, I think. But Galaxy can connect steps directly like this using connect, and this is part of the DSL for connections. And I can just say this step needs to come after this other step. So it's a connection, or this second step has to wait for the first step, but it's not waiting through a file. It's a dependency at the step level. So we have these workflows. We can now write them in our editor. We can, use Git. We can use our developer processes on them. I think testing is really important. So Planemo supports testing of these workflows. Simply say Planemo test in the workflow. You get the same great HTML and other formatting options as tools. It produces a shareable test result that you can, post into a PR or whatever with Planemo share test. And it can test either native Galaxy workflows or Format 2 Galaxy workflows. To do this, I developed a sort of generalized test format that can test any artifact that Planemo knows how to reason about. So a Galaxy tool, a Galaxy workflow, a CWL tool, or a CWL workflow, and all using the same YAML-based schema and format. So if you have an artifact like myworkflow.ga, Planemo will just look for an artifact in the same directory with a -test.yaml as the extension, and that's where the test case will define. That's where it will look for a test case. And this is what the test case looks like. If you use CWL, it's based roughly on CWL's test structure, but it maps just fine to Galaxy workflows. You can give a little documentation string. You define the jobs, so the inputs, and you define expectations on the outputs. So the sort of CWL style of output is to look for a checksum, but all of the options that are available in Galaxy Tools are available here also. So for the workflow output 2 here, I'm giving it a file, but I know this file maybe won't be exact, so I can use a compare type just like in Galaxy Tool format and give it the lines of diff. So we have all this infrastructure now for running the workflow and talking to a cluster, talking to a database. There's no reason now that we can't just take this and make it a sort of general purpose command line execution tool for workflows. So if you take that job description that is the same as was defined in that test file and just create your own JSON or YAML file with it in it, now Planemo can just run the workflow on the command line this way. So you can drive workflows without even ever knowing that Galaxy is happening behind the scenes. It's using those Galaxy artifacts in a very sort of developer-friendly way. So this should ideally be much easier to run than just sort of saying, here's the BioBlend API. The BioBlend API is fantastic, but it's not quite to this level of usability on the command line. Briefly talk about the common workflow language also. Michael covered most of this yesterday. He'll have a poster. Well, he'll be standing at the poster station at 3:15 at poster 6. There's some experimental support for tools in Galaxy today, CWL tools in Galaxy. Well, not in Galaxy, in Planemo. So if Planemo encounters a CWL artifact, such as a tool or or a workflow, it will use a fork of Galaxy that has that has experimental CWL support in it. So it can serve, test, and run CWL tools, but not workflows at this time. But Planemo, even though it can't run a CWL workflow through Galaxy, it can run it through the reference implementation of the CWL spec called CWL tool. So the CWL engine type, which we saw earlier to power what Planemo uses as its execution engine with Docker instead of a local Galaxy instance, can also be given CWL tool as a parameter. And then it can run and test tools and workflows using the reference implementation. So, but obviously it can't serve because the reference implementation of CWL doesn't have a user interface, which is good. If you were at the trainings, one of these trainings that Bjorn mentioned, you saw a command line that looks a lot like this to initialize a tool. One of the only differences here with this and the sort of default intro that we normally do for tools is that I've added the CWL flag. So now now Planemo will generate a CWL tool instead of a Galaxy tool if I'm given this flag. So I run that, and on the left here is what will be produced in seek.tk-seek.cwl. That's the tool file. And actually, the nature of CWL is such that more of the tool is specified because I have to infer what the prefix and basically how the command is structured. And ToolInit will do that. So I think this tool is probably a little bit more complete than the default Galaxy tool would be coming out of ToolInit. Hopefully we can get this style processing back into the Galaxy tool generation at some point. But if you haven't seen the CWL tool, I mean, it looks a lot like Galaxy. You can specify a Docker requirement. You can specify a label, which will show up in Galaxy as the short name, well, in the fork of Galaxy that supports CWL. And base command that's sort of used to sort of, the arguments to the tool are prepended to that. The description is just like the help text in Galaxy. And it generates a test case using that generalized test format also. CWL can lint this tool now, or Planemo can lint this tool now, just like it could a Galaxy tool. It can test it. It can test it either with Galaxy or with CWL tool. Either way, the tool test output will be that pretty HTML file you're used to from Planemo. And I think that's it. So I'd just like to thank everybody, all the people, but in particular on the orange I have the Planemo contributors. Thank you to the Galaxy team and the IUC, to the Common Workflow Language Group, and to basically to everyone that's ever built something cool with Planemo or Galaxy workflows, because that's why I'm in it. Great, thanks. Questions?
Thanks. So you brought magic to Galaxy. So this Planemo would run in any other different operating systems the same, since the requirements might be a bit different. What I understand is you have a workflow, it will pull everything what it needs for that. But then if you have Debian versus CentOS, there might be some tools or some dependencies at the operating system level.
Yeah, so both Galaxy tools, well, let's take Galaxy tools and workflows specifically. I mean, they're meant to be operating system independent. I mean, they're meant to be POSIX. All the IOC tools, for instance, will run on Mac OS X or CentOS or Debian.